I'll be very explicit about what I'm asking. If you know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of innocent civilians in any target, whether it's a UN facility or anything, do you think that that is a legitimate target?
Well, okay, 2 points before you say I'm not answering your question. I'm not going to stand up here and make a blanket statement about what is or is not a legitimate target. We'll take each on its face value. But the second point is that, as I just said to Matt, we want the Israelis to take more steps to protect civilians. We know Gaza is a very densely populated area. It's difficult. We know that too. But we do think they need to take more steps. And look, when you see a school, an UNRWA school, another one being shelled, reportedly having innocent civilians, including children, killed, it is pretty disturbing. So we'll continue having the conversation.
Mary, are you aware of the number of Palestinians that are in UNRWA schools?
That are under...
that are actually in UN facilities?
I don't have a number for you, Say. They may have one.
Are you aware that the head of UNHCR and UNRWA in Gaza just issued a statement that none of the schools where Palestinians are taking shelter had actually rockets in them? Are you aware of that?
Well, I hadn't seen the statement. As I said, I can't confirm that they did. We're trying to get all the facts right now.
And let me ask you something. They also said that the shell that hit the school was 155 millimeter shell, which is only the Israelis have. So why can't you determine that?
Because we don't have all the facts yet, Saeed. There's conflicting reports, and we want to get all the facts before we make statements.
Okay, let me just follow up.
Sorry.
Let's do one at a time.
What is the
No,
what's the conflicting
Saeed's
report?
Finish, and then I'll go to you, Matt. Go ahead, Saeed.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. What is the conflicting report? That's a good question.
Well, we've...
Okay,
so you
just
help,
leave, and
so
everyone else can
Matt
ask the
out.
question.
Yeah.
No, everyone gets to ask in order. Nobody gets to interrupt people. So, look, we've seen the Israelis have at times throughout this conflict, when we've talked about particularly the last UNRWA school, there are conflicting reports. They've said they've done their investigations. There are certain reports coming out from the ground. There are different numbers of casualties. There are just conflicting reports about exactly what was in the school, what happened to it, and the number of casualties.
But Marie, this is becoming...
So you have to sort out those conflicting reports.
I understand that there may be some conflict, but this is becoming a daily ritual. I mean, the Israelis drop leaflets telling the Palestinians to evacuate. They take shelter in these facilities. Then they are targeted. You know, parks are targeted, hospitals are targeted, all these things are targeted. Pretty soon you're not going to have any space where they are going to go. Where should they go?
Look, as I said, the UN has done remarkable work here with really overflowing facilities. So we know this is a huge humanitarian challenge. That's exactly the reason, Saeed. The Secretary is working to put in place a humanitarian ceasefire so we can get medical supplies and food and water to the people of Gaza who are suffering.
And how far along are you with the effort to have a humanitarian ceasefire in place?
The Secretary is continuing his efforts to see if the parties are willing to agree to an unconditional humanitarian ceasefire that lasts, long enough for serious negotiations to begin in Cairo, and also to get some urgently needed humanitarian assistance to Gaza. So, look, this is a proposal we are discussing with the parties. We've hopefully need to make a little more progress, but obviously there's some more work to do, Saeed.
The Israelis announced a 4-hour humanitarian ceasefire, yet they bombed aerial bombardment. They continued aerial bombardment, where dozens were killed during that time. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, we're working for is an unconditional humanitarian ceasefire. It takes two parties to agree to that, and we obviously haven't had that in place yet.
Last week, Ambassador Dermer argued before a group of reporters that UN facilities are off limits unless they believe that there are weapons inside, regardless of whether there are people inside. Are the Israelis correct to be making this argument that under the law of war, that targeting a facility that is supposed to be neutral ground is in fact legal?
Well, look, we think it's very important. UN neutrality is a very important principle. I'm not going to make a broader international legal judgment, but we believe that UN facilities are neutral and that people should not be targeted in them.
In light of these repeated shellings on facilities that are supposed to be neutral, given the U.S.'s position as a member of the P5 on the Security Council, has the ambassador or someone from the embassy been called in for more intensive personal discussions about this incident?
Well, I don't have any meeting updates to share about this specific incident, but I can assure you that we've been in close contact with Ambassador Dermer, with many senior Israeli officials, including at the Secretary's level, over the past weeks, days, hours, all of the above.
And then one more, you keep saying that we need to sort out the facts on the ground. Given that we're talking about two entities that are essentially at war with each other, a government and a terrorist group, whom do you believe if they're both doing their investigations?
Well, we attempt to get our own facts, Roz, and that's why we don't just take any one person's word for it. We see what the facts are coming out of the ground. We have a number of ways to do that, including by talking to the parties, but also getting our own information as well. And that's why we don't rush to judgment or just make statements before we can back it up.
Are you suggesting that U.S. personnel are inside Gaza doing their own ground
I
assessments?
wasn't suggesting that. I said there's a variety of ways we can get our own information. I was not suggesting that.
Madam, how can you stop innocent killings in the future at the UN facilities around the globe, not only in this here? Are you talking at the United Nations that they have responsibility to check it out what they have in their facilities and all that? Because people are. This is not the first incident at the United Nations facilities around the globe. Have been many.
It's a good question. We certainly talked to the United Nations about this because, look, they don't want their facilities targeted either. I think probably more than anyone else. So we talked to them about it. We've talked to them about what they should do. We've tried, the Secretary General has been very focused on the issue of what they should do if they find rockets in their school. They're making progress there. So again, it's a very tough operating environment, and we'll keep working with them.
One more, Marie. How do you hold people accountable for these sorts of attacks?
Well, look, I don't think, I understand the question, but what we're focused on, because of not just this attack, but others, and what the Secretary is focused on, is right now getting a ceasefire in place. We need all of the attacks to stop, so we can get humanitarian assistance in, so we can set the groundwork for negotiations in Cairo for a longer ceasefire. So obviously that's what we're focused on in the immediate term. And that's what he's working towards. He's had another, dozen phone calls today on just this issue.
What kind of a system or protocol you have working to determine whether the Israelis are in fact deliberately targeting Palestinian civilians?
Well, Saeed,
should there be a consequence?
We have a number of ways of looking at getting the facts on the ground. I just don't have more on that for you.
Israel says that it's right.
And Margaret, go ahead, and then I'll go to
Okay,
Margaret.
so Israel has long said that it has the right to self-defense. Of course, you've echoed that sentiment, and they've said this throughout this conflict, and even up until now, we have 1,200 people, over 1,200 people that have been killed, thousands more that have been injured. Is there going to be a point where you say, this enormous amount of casualties is not justified anymore? Will you condemn Israel?
Look, a lot of what you just said is true. And the first part, I'll start with the first part, that Israel does have a right to defend itself. If you lived in a city where rockets were coming from terrorists repeatedly, where you had to run to a bomb shelter repeatedly, I think you'd probably feel pretty strongly that Israel has a right to defend itself. We've announced again this week additional funding for the Iron Dome system, which does exactly this. But we have said that in their efforts to fight this threat, they do need to take additional steps to prevent civilian casualties. We know it's a challenging operating environment. We know it's very densely populated. We, throughout conflicts we've fought in our history, have taken extraordinary steps in Afghanistan and Iraq to prevent civilian casualties, and we've called on the Israelis to do more. So we're going to continue having the conversation.
One more question. Today, the Israeli military offered a 4-hour humanitarian ceasefire in specific areas of the Gaza Strip. Now, Hamas dismissed that partial temporary ceasefire because they said it didn't give them enough relief in the areas that they needed in order to collect casualties and so on and so forth. What's your take on that partial ceasefire?
Well, we're focused on... Excuse me. Give me 1 second. What we're focused on is an unconditional humanitarian ceasefire that lasts long enough to allow for serious negotiations to begin in Cairo and for urgently needed humanitarian assistance to get in. So obviously that's longer than 4 hours. So we're working with the parties on what that might look like. Sorry. Yep, or go to Margaret first, yeah.
Marie, from a policy perspective, is there any consideration or conversation about making some of the military aid conditional, given that you were calling on Israel to also hold fire and to pull back here?
I haven't heard that at all mentioned.
So when you talked about further aid for Iron Dome, that is a defensive system, but resupplying ammunition, other things are offensive materials. And there are reports that the U.S. is resupplying Israel with ammunition. Is that
I can check on the
clear
specifics.
and correct?
Yeah, let me check with my colleagues at the Department of Defense and see. I just don't know the answer.
That would seem to be inconsistent with the position of calling on all sides to pull back.
Let me check on what the facts are.
Isn't
here.
this kind of State Department, political, military?
It would be a combination of both, so I'm happy to check.
So apparently there are 120 millimeter mortar rounds, 40 millimeter ammunition for grenade launchers, coming from the Pentagon's War Reserve Stockpile Ammunition
Pentagon.
Israel Program.
Being the keyword that you just said.
Excuse me?
Pentagon? Being the keyword. I'll check with the
I
Pentagon,
know,
and I'll
but
check
it's
with
a
my...
U.S., it's a State Department decision, I think.
I understand that.
right?
Let me check and see what the details are.
No, but you're comfortable sending, resupplying this weaponry.
I
to
don't
the
even know if that's
Israelis.
happening.
All
I'm
right.
happy to check
Can
on
I
the
use, in the White House statement, and sorry, I can't remember if you
Mm-hmm.
actually repeated this part, but it says that the U.S. is particularly concerned that Palestinians who have been told by the IDF to leave their homes
Mm-hmm.
are going to these UN-designated shelters and they're not safe.
Correct, yes. We are extremely concerned that thousands of internally displaced Palestinians who have been called on by the Israeli military to evacuate their homes are not safe in UN-designated shelters in Gaza. This is extremely concerning to us.
Right, it's extremely
Uh-huh.
it's extremely concerning and understandable, but why is it that they're not safe?
Well, because we've seen, unfortunately...
Is it because of the Israelis or is it because of Hamas?
Well, at a root cause, Matt, look, the reason that these civilians are unsafe is because Hamas has had a pattern of hiding weapons, of hiding fighters in these schools. So that Hamas has put these civilians at risk. Now, we're still getting the facts about exactly what has happened, and there have been conflicting reports. You can choose not to believe them, but there have been conflicting reports about who has shelled these schools. But clearly, these civilians are at risk.
Well, but if you're saying that it's, I'm not sure how you can say that, and at the same time, if you say that Hamas is putting these people at risk, and you still condemn the shelling, it doesn't seem to follow logically.
Why?
Well, because if in fact you say that Hamas has put these people at risk, that would suggest that you think that it's a legitimate target.
I'm not
Am I-
saying that at all. I'm
Okay.
saying that Hamas's actions have put people at risk.
And
Doesn't
then
mean it's okay for the UN's neutrality to be violated
by anybody.
by anybody.
Right.
Like,
All right. Who is it that you want to do this investigation? Is it okay with you guys if it's the Israelis alone, or does there need to be
I think
some
there
kind of international component to it?
well, I don't have anything specific in terms of a formal investigation, but I think it needs to be broader than just one side here. I think it needs to, obviously, we are undertaking our own information gathering. We talk to the parties, we try and get the facts, but I don't think it should just be any one party to this.
Okay, so you would not be comfortable then with Israel just investigating on its own and coming to some conclusion?
Well, they're
is that
certainly
correct?
free to, but I think that we would make our own judgments and not just base our judgments on that.
Also, don't you think there's kind of a difference of opinion, regardless of whether, well, I mean, I guess if in fact it was Israelis that hit the school, that there's a difference of opinions on whether a UN facility is a legitimate target, because according the Israelis maintain that this is a target because they're going after these rockets.
Right, we'll see what comes out when we look and get the facts here at least, but it does seem that sometimes there are difference of opinions here.
A couple hours after this shelling incident, there was another incident at a marketplace, which apparently has also killed in the teens of people. Now, this was not a UN facility, but it appears from some of the reports that the people who, or most of the people who were killed and wounded there were civilians. Is the administration prepared to condemn an attack like that?
I'm
Or
actually
is
not
it-
familiar with that specific
Okay,
incident.
well then,
I'm
in
happy to
previous attacks on previous shelling incidents on non-UNRWA facilities where civilians have been killed, is the administration prepared to retroactively condemn those shelling incidents as well? Because you haven't thus far. You have until today said you're expressed deep concern and said that you would like the Israelis to do more. But I'm wondering if the administration is prepared to go retroactively since the beginning of this conflict to condemn all incidents where there have been civilian casualties.
I don't think I'm going to go that far, Matt. And in part, look, we understand that the Israelis have said they have very high standards. We believe they could do more. But this is, unfortunately, a conflict zone, and sometimes civilians tragically are injured or killed. That's why we've called on the Israelis to do more to protect them. So I don't want to make a blanket statement. Again, that's why the Secretary is so focused on getting a ceasefire in place so it stops on all sides.
Last week, you said after the vote at the Human Rights Commission that the United States was proud to stand with Israel and would, even if it meant standing alone. That is still the case today?
Absolutely.
And then okay.
Can I just follow up on that particular point? I understand that this resolution at the UN Human Rights Council was completely one-sided and biased, okay? So I would understand that you sided with Israel on that. And it did not take into account Hamas's role in this conflict, any, discussion of them storing weapons in facilities or using human shields. So that's fine. But are you saying that no matter whether Israel is right or wrong, I mean, even if they're, 100% wrong, are you saying that you would still side with Israel against the international community just because Israel is a good friend?
I mean, at least that's a huge hypothetical. I don't even know how to begin.
Seems as if a lot of times
I don't even know how to begin to address. I think we have too often seen in the international community that Israel has been singled out. That
I agree with you.
100%. And that's why we have stood by them against that. And so, look, that's a huge hypothetical. I don't even want to venture to guess, but we have felt that it was important to stand by them in these international fora when this has happened, like we saw last week.
But if the United Nations, and it does look as if the UN, although they haven't been able to do anything kind of balanced and fair and, and insert themselves into the conflict, if the United Nations were to take up some kind of remedy or address or a statement that were to condemn both sides, or were to take into account the responsibilities of both sides, are you saying that you would sign on to that?
It's a good question. I think we have to look at what the language actually said before we can make a decision.
But do you think, clearly Israel has been singled out by the United Nations, more than multiple
decades.
times over years, yes. But does that absolve them of any type, just because they've been, singled out, that doesn't absolve them of any responsibility here?
No, not at all.
Are you undertaking any independent action to determine whether these allegations of having rockets and ammunition in the schools are true or not?
Well, as I said, we're fact-finding and gathering information from a variety of sources.
Are you sending a commission? How are you fact-finding?
I don't have anything formal like that to announce or to preview, but again, we're trying to get more information.
India.
Anything else on Gaza?
Yeah, one more thing.
And then we'll go to
So you believe that all Israel's assaults on Gaza are justifiable, right? Justifiable
I
acts
have
of
not said
self-defense.
that in any way from this podium. You're putting
Okay.
words in my
Like
mouth.
how much of it? Like 90%?
I'm not going to
95.
put a percent on it. As I've
Okay.
said, they have the right to defend themselves, and we'll look at each incident
Okay.
on its own merits.
Marie, honestly, like one could, when they ask you whether the argument the United States puts forward is the same argument as Israel, is that it's doing so in self-defense. So why is it in self-defense? Because Hamas fires rockets, right?
Correct.
Okay.
If you were living
So-
in a city where you had to run to your bomb shelter because rockets
Okay.
were, I think you probably
don't
feel
you
like you need
think-
to defend yourself.
Don't you think
I
you
could be
should-
wrong.
Don't you think you should also question the proportionality of the Israeli response?
Well, as I said,
like-
the Israelis need to do more to prevent civilian casualties. I think
Mm-hmm.
I've made that pretty clear.
And thanks to the Iron Dome missiles, really Hamas's rockets pose almost no real threat to
That is
Israel.
a completely false statement. I would
It's
be
like
careful.
relatively low
I would be
casualty.
careful making those statements. It's a dangerous statement to make, actually. Iron Dome has been very successful.
But 2 civilians have been killed after firing hundreds of missiles.
Okay, let's be clear,
Rockets.
though. Hamas is still a very real threat to Israel.
Two things. First of all, I just want to point out, back on the ammo issue, the State Department needs to give its permission to these sales. So if you can just
I'll
see
check.
what-
Yeah, I
what
really,
the US
guys, I really just don't know the facts.
Yeah.
I will check.
And then, just back to what my colleague was saying. Iron Dome, that's something that you did with Israel. What kind of things is the United States prepared to do or is thinking about, or do you have any ideas on how you can protect Palestinian civilians from both Israel and the residuals actions of Hamas?
Well, I hate to keep going back to this, but the ceasefire is the best way to do that. And that's why the Secretary's putting
Yeah, but
so much
in the
effort
absence
behind
of a
it.
ceasefire.
Well, in the absence of a ceasefire, there are going to be a lot of civilians still at risk. So there's not an option here that's absent a ceasefire. But going forward, obviously, one of the reasons the Secretary has worked very hard on issues like Middle East peace, but also here on this specific issue and what a longer-term ceasefire might look like, is because we know there's a very real ongoing threat from Hamas, and we know that the citizens of Gaza are unfortunately put in the middle of this conflict. So that's why we're working on a longer-term solution.
Are you
as
talking
well.
to any of the neighboring countries about perhaps taking in Palestinian civilians as refugees?
Not that I've heard, Elise. I'm happy to check.
Can you check?
Hamas's arsenal, the Israeli military intelligence estimated that they have at this point fewer than 3,000 rockets, and obviously because of various other political incidents, they don't have the same relationships with their suppliers that they used to have. Mm-hmm. Is there any sense that this conflict could be coming to an end simply because Hamas is running out of ammunition, as it were?
Well, I can't confirm those numbers. I just don't know if they're true or not. Hamas remains a very real threat, but obviously it would be the goal ultimately that Hamas is no longer able to threaten Israel. But all you have to see is the rockets continuing to fly in to see that it still remains today a very real threat.
You know, do you have any reason to doubt the UNRWA version of events?
We're still trying to get the facts here, Matt.
That's great, but that's not my question. Do you have any reason to doubt their version of
I
events?
don't have a way to answer that yes or no because we don't have all the facts yet. They've put out a statement, and I just can't make a judgment on it.
Can I ask? I have a quick one on Syria, and then. Oh, sorry. You want to
more in Israel?
Okay.
Not on this specifically, but
Okay.
about the 15-year-old Palestinian American kid who's been held. Is there any update on him?
No update.
And then I wanted to know more broadly. Yesterday, we all saw this purported transcript of the president's call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, which both the White House and the Prime Minister's office
Things I've ever seen,
denied.
to be frank.
Is the administration concerned at all that there are people in Israel, whether they're government officials or others, who are trying to hurt the U.S.-Israel relationship, particularly between the administration of this president and Israel?
Well, Matt, I think in general over the past few days, it has been really shocking and I think frankly disappointing for some of the personal attacks we've seen on Secretary Kerry, some of the absurd accusations made about his intentions, and then yesterday this crazy, completely fabricated transcript that bore no responsibility in any way to reality. So there's clearly people, I don't know who, and I don't want to guess because I'm not in a position to do that, who are putting out false and defamatory and absurd information about our intentions on this side, certainly with Secretary Kerry and the President. So it's deeply concerning to us and it's disappointing because everything we have done, whether it's Iron Dome, whether it's the hours and hours the Secretary has put into the peace process, or even just getting a ceasefire in place, has been designed to protect Israel's security. So whoever it is, I don't want to guess what their motives are, but it is concerning and it's disappointing.
All right. Is it also disappointing and upsetting that members of Congress are saying the same thing virtually? I mean, not virtually, they are. They're saying, in some cases, they're even more critical than what we have heard from Israel.
Absolutely. I think it's disappointing, I think it's concerning, and I think it's wrong.
Why do you think that is? That members of Congress are doing that?
Well,
I mean, Israel we can understand, but why are members of Congress blasting the efforts of the Secretary of State to bring peace to the Middle East?
I don't, making a blanket statement here without having seen all of their comments, many members of Congress, I think, like to use Israel as a political issue to try to divide the country, and we have always said Israel and support for Israel should not be a political issue. It should not be a partisan issue because it's not. And so I think often it's used in that context, and I think that's been disappointing, and I don't want to venture to guess why all of them might be doing this.
Do you think that those actions of what you just said, using Israel as a political tool, does that hamper sometimes your ability to use all the tools in the diplomatic toolbox?
It's a good question, Elise. I think a couple points. The first is it certainly hasn't hampered our efforts to provide unprecedented levels of funding to Israel for its security. Again, I keep going back to Iron Dome, but it really is a remarkable system that we helped develop and certainly
that's
funded.
In support of Israel.
Exactly.
Do you
it hasn't hampered that.
But has it hampered you from being able to kind of give Israel the kind of tough messages or tough policy options that you might have because Congress is such a keen supporter of Israel?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I think we've been very clear with the Israelis when there are issues When we have concerns, when we raise them, we do so privately, but I think we've been very clear about that. And look, I think the partisan noise you hear sometimes back in Washington, Secretary is certainly familiar with that kind of partisan noise, and I think is really able to tune it out.
Is it really partisan, though? It seems
Much
like...
of it is quite partisan.
No, but what I'm saying is...
Or political in nature.
It's political, but it's not partisan, because both sides of the aisle...
It's often, check it out, but it is often fairly partisan.
What, are you saying that, like, people in Congress are trying to compete for who's more pro-Israel?
I think that many of the criticisms this administration gets, both on our policy towards Israel and in general in foreign policy, tends to come from the other side of the aisle.
Well, going back to motives, given the stratospheric poll ratings that the Netanyahu government is getting right now, couldn't it be argued, as some Israeli analysts have, that a lot of this criticism is being done for domestic political consumption? And if so, why shouldn't this administration just ignore it?
Well, as I just said, I think that a lot of the rhetoric, unfortunately, in this country about Israel is done for political and for partisan reasons. The Secretary is not focused on that. He's focused on what's best for the security of Israel and how we can get a ceasefire in place.
But that was suggested in reference to the U.S. Congress. This isn't in reference to the Israeli body politic.
I'm sorry, Roz, I don't understand your question.
Is that the same? Are you making the same point that some of this criticism, some of these leaks, some of these whispers in the Israeli press and to the U.S. press, frankly, is designed to boost Netanyahu's hold on power?
Well, I don't want to guess about that kind of political intention, but I do. What else can you assume from a completely fabricated quote transcript that in no way resembled reality that was leaked to an Israeli news outlet? I don't know what else you can assume about the intentions except that they're designed to hurt our relationship. Now, I don't know towards what end. I don't know who did it, but I don't know what other conclusion you can draw from that. What other conclusion you can draw from respected voices in Israel talking about the Secretary of State, claiming he supports Hamas, which is offensive and absurd.
Do you think that this is coming from the... I'm sorry, Roz.
No, it's okay.
Do you think that this is coming just from the press and like Israeli systems? This is coming from Israeli officials that are speaking on background.
I don't. Well,
it's in the article.
I leave it to you all to determine.
It's in the article saying that these sources are coming from the U.S. This is criticism of the Israeli government that's being planted in the Israeli press. Have you talked to the Israelis?
And I would say that kind of criticism coming from any ally, certainly Israel, just really has no place in this discussion. You also heard Ambassador Dermer out this morning on TV talking about actually condemning some of this criticism.
That was after 3 days of negative articles about how John Kerry is a strategic terrorist attack.
Well, and I think, quite frankly, that those articles, whoever puts that out there, I mean, it's so disappointing.
Does that hurt equally, like burn even particularly more, considering the like unequivocal support that you've given Israel, especially considering what we talked about at the UN? That kind of that you stood with Israel alone in the international community.
Absolutely, that the level of support this administration has given Israel has been, quite frankly, unprecedented in our history. That we have stood by them even when we stood alone, even in very tough times, and we are proud to do so. I think that, and the Secretary, the hours all of us have spent with the Secretary in Jerusalem and, trying to get Middle East peace, trying to work to protect Israel's security. I think that's why it's so disappointing, that it's just so at odds with reality and quite frankly, just flies in the face of everything we've been trying to do.
Marie, you just said that, again that you stand with Israel and, quote, we are proud to do so.
We are.
Even after an incident like today, which you have condemned without blame, but even after saying that Israel has not lived up to its own high standards.
Both can be true.
You're comfortable with Israel not living up to its own high standards.
I didn't say that.
But using weaponry that's been supplied by the United States. Is that correct?
We have a very broad relationship with Israel to help it defend itself. I will check on the specifics about the resupply. But yes, we are very committed to their security.
Right.
That's why these vicious attacks on the Secretary are just crazy.
Right. Well, it's one thing to be very committed to their security, but it's another thing to stand silent when, even if it's accidental.
I think I've been anything but silent.
Well, no. Even when it's accidental, that when there are these large numbers of civilian casualties. right?
Well, I haven't
mean,
been silent on civilian casualties.
well, but you have made a specific point that you're not condemning Israel for this latest incident.
Because we aren't sure of the facts
Okay.
here.
Now, listen, when I mentioned the call, I wasn't trying to get into this whole political thing. I wanted to actually talk about in the call, but more specifically, Secretary Kerry has had presumably similar conversations with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that was what I want to get into.
Well, not similar, because that had no
No, I mean, whatever.
phone
The
conversation.
real conversation between the President and the Prime Minister, presumably Secretary Kerry has had similar conversations to that with this faux transcript that you say talks about how Qatar and Turkey need to be interlocutors in bringing Hamas to the table. Whether or not the transcript is false or not, that is something that the United States agrees with, right?
But I want to make very clear. No, but I don't want to actually tee off of this transcript to ask substantive questions because it is so ridiculous.
Okay, well then let me put it
Let's
this way.
just ask
All
the
right.
questions aside from the transcript.
Forget about the transcript.
Okay, thank you.
Do you believe that the cooperation or help of Turkey and Qatar is going to be is critical
Yes.
to getting Hamas on board with a ceasefire?
Yes, and the Secretary has spoken to the Qatari Foreign Minister 3 times today, also to the Turkish Foreign Minister as well, and numerous times over the past week.
Okay. Is it not a fact that Israel has expressed reservations about involving both the Turks and the Qataris in this process and has said that they think that the Egyptian, that it undercuts both them and the Egyptians?
Well, we believe, obviously the Egyptians are leading here. That's why we're talking about bringing people to Cairo for a negotiation. But the fact is it takes 2 to have a ceasefire, and we need to get Hamas to yes here.
Right.
And there aren't that many people that have influence with Hamas.
So is it correct in in the Secretary's conversations with the Israelis that he has said or made the case that Israel really isn't in a position here to be able to choose who it wants to mediate because...
That's not the tone of the conversation, Matt.
Well, don't think I ascribed any tone to it at all. I'm
Well,
trying to do it flat and monotone.
Well,
without any-
that was not a flat statement.
Let me put it this way. Has the United States told Israel that it cannot choose who it wants to mediate or to be involved in bringing Hamas on board?
That's not how I would describe the conversation. To be clear, so I'm saying no. The Israelis are supportive of our efforts here.
What?
To get a ceasefire, and they're supportive in general of the way we are going about doing that.
Yesterday, the Secretary said that Prime Minister Netanyahu had asked him to arrange a humanitarian ceasefire. Officials in the Prime Minister's office say that just isn't true.
Well, I think I'm going to stick with my boss.
So, when
what'd
you
you
say that Israel is supportive of your efforts to that, what's the evidence for that?
Well, the Secretary has been in close communication with them over many, many days, and they are working very closely with us on what a ceasefire might look like. So they're clearly part of this process, and they are working with us to try to get everyone to yes here.
Well, okay, but the problem is that the other thing the
They're
Secretary
engaged
said was that
actively in the process with the Secretary.
But the Secretary said that he was doing this, and President Obama was supporting him in doing this because of Prime Minister Netanyahu's, quote, commitment to a ceasefire. And then he said that that's what he's going to take that at face value, but if there's something, if he talked about somebody playing a game here, is that possible? Do you think that the Israelis could be telling him one thing privately and then saying something, whispering something else completely different behind his back?
The Israeli government is very focused at a number of levels working with the Secretary to get a ceasefire.
Okay.
Now,
I know you don't want to talk about the alleged transcript, but
I'll talk about it.
Okay.
'Cause it's complete
One
crap.
of the things was complete crap. That's a
Complete crap.
diplomatic
Use that technical term there.
In it, the president
It is.
the president was quoted as saying that
The transcript of the call between Prime Minister Netanyahu and the president.
he was said that he trusts Turkey and Qatar to be honest brokers.
Why are you going back to a totally false?
Well, I want to know. I just want to know. It raises the question: does the administration believe that Turkey and Qatar are honest brokers? That they are that they can do this job and that they deserve to be trusted. I mean, you know, the Israelis, have reason to be very suspicious of Turkey.
It's really not about trust.
Well, okay.
It's not. And we have spoken out, to be fair, when Turkey has made some comments, leaders in Turkey,
Right.
about how that diminishes their ability to play a role here. So we have spoken out about that over the past days and
Okay,
weeks.
but then why are you relying on them so
we're
heavily
not
if their
relying
role has
on
been
them. The
diminished?
Egyptians have the lead in this process here. But look, there are only a number of countries that have any influence with Hamas. And we need to get them to yes to have a ceasefire. So does that mean we talk to the Turks and the Qataris? It's not about trust. It's about getting a terrorist organization to agree to a ceasefire. That's a complicated thing
It's
to do.
also about them being a productive actor. I mean, if you're going to Qatar and Qatar is holding out and urging Hamas not to take a ceasefire because it thinks it could get more things, then maybe that's not. I think what Israel is maintaining is that Qatar is not only acting as a conduit and a kind of liaison or intermediary with Hamas, but is trying to, get the most for Hamas. Is a friend of Hamas,
I
and
understand
is
the question.
basically there's no difference that they maintain negotiating with Hamas or negotiating with Qatar.
Well, I would strongly disagree with that. And look, I do think we believe the Egyptians, the UN, our other partners are working on this to get to a ceasefire. We do believe that the partners we're working with want to get to a ceasefire. And what that looks like is obviously something that's, at the end of the day, up to the two sides here. But we have put ideas on the table. I think we've made some progress, but again, not enough yet, clearly. Any more
India.
on Gaza?
Well, can I just ask a quick question
Yeah,
on
and then
Syria,
we'll move on.
your
Oh, yeah.
humanitarian
Yeah,
aid?
let's do Syria.
This is a lot of money.
Yes. it is.
And I understand you did a small breakdown of like where it's going in terms of location. But it is a lot of money, and I mean, are you concerned? Could you break down a little bit who it's going through? Because there is a serious concern that this money in such large quantities could fall into the wrong hands, and a lot of it would disappear.
Well, it's part of the implementation of UN Security Council
So is it-
Resolution 2165.
So is it a UN appeal?
I'm sorry?
Is it a UN appeal?
Well, it's part of the full implementation. It's a little bit separate from it as well. Let me see if there's more specifics about what NGOs and what specifically at the UN this is going to. At least we put out a fact sheet, so I'm not sure it's in
Yeah,
there.
I don't think that really
Okay, I
addressed
can-
it. But
I'll
I mean,
check.
I would assume some of it is going to UN organizations like UNHCR and all that stuff.
And we,
but I would
vet people, and look, when we give them to
Right.
NGOs, we vet them very
right.
thoroughly.
Yeah, but if you could do more of a breakdown
Let me see
of
what I
that.
can get.